In the heart of ancient Zimbabwe, long before the borders and names we recognize today, there existed a world filled with wonder and mystery. The land was as vast as the imagination of its people, stretching from the rolling hills of Dombudzvuku to the mighty Zambezi River. Here, the earth was rich with the stories of ancestors, and the skies were painted with the colors of spirits who watched over the land. This was a time when animals could speak in the language of men, and the wind carried whispers of ancient secrets to those who knew how to listen. It was in this world that a boy named Chaminuka was born, a boy who would grow into a man of such profound wisdom and spiritual power that his name would be etched into the very fabric of Zimbabwean folklore. The morning of Chaminuka's birth was unlike any other. As the first light of dawn crept across the horizon, the village of Dombudzvuku stirred to life. Birds sang in harmony with the rustling leaves, and the air was filled with a sense of anticipation, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Inside a modest hut on the edge of the village, a woman named Maide was in labor, surrounded by midwives who chanted prayers to the ancestors. The hut was small, with walls of hardened mud and a thatched roof that offered little protection from the elements, but it was filled with the warmth of family and tradition. The elders of the village, wise with age and experience, gathered outside, pretending to be busy with their daily tasks, but casting anxious glances toward the hut. They knew that today was special. They could feel it in the air. As Mayde's labor pains intensified, a strange calm descended upon the village. The chickens, notorious for their early morning racket, fell silent. The dogs, usually so eager to bark at anything that moved, lay quietly in the shade. Even the goats, those stubborn creatures who seemed to delight in causing chaos, stopped their relentless bleating. Inside the hut, the midwives exchanged puzzled looks as they felt a gentle breeze sweep through the room, carrying with it a sense of peace and tranquility. It was as if the very spirits of the ancestors had come to witness the birth of this child. When Chaminuka finally entered the world, his eyes were wide open, taking in his surroundings with a gaze that seemed far too wise for a newborn. The midwives, who had delivered countless children, gasped in awe. There was something different about this boy, something extraordinary. Maide, exhausted but filled with a mother's pride, cradled her son in her arms and named him Chaminuka, which means one who rises above. It was a name that would come to define him, for even as an infant, Chaminuka possessed a presence that set him apart from others. His eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to hold the wisdom of the ages, and his calm demeanor spoke of a soul that was in tune with the spiritual world. As word of Chaminuka's birth spread through the village, the stories began to grow. Some claimed that a great eagle had flown overhead at the moment of his birth, its wings casting a protective shadow over the hut. Others swore they had heard the distant sound of drums, as if the ancestors themselves were celebrating the arrival of this special child. And then there was the tale of the old goat who had suddenly stopped in its tracks and stared at the hut as if it, too, recognized the significance of the event. The village spirit medium, Mbuya Nahanda, was summoned to offer her interpretation of these signs. Mbuya Nahanda was a woman of great stature, not in physical size but in spiritual presence. She was a conduit between the living and the dead, a woman whose words were heeded by all who valued their lives and livelihoods. When she arrived at Mayde's hut, she took one look at the newborn and nodded knowingly. "This child is blessed," she declared. "The ancestors have chosen him. He will be a bridge between our world and theirs, a leader who will guide us with wisdom and courage." The villagers, who had learned to trust Mbuya Nahanda's insights, nodded in agreement, though a few still couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at the notion of a newborn being anything more than a source of sleepless nights and endless diapers. As Chaminuka grew, it became clear that he was no ordinary child. While other children played and caused the usual mischief, Chaminuka was different. He spent hours alone, wandering the wilderness that surrounded the village. He would sit beneath the shade of ancient baobab trees, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as if he were deep in thought. But Chaminuka's thoughts were not those of a typical child. He was communing with the spirits of the land, listening to the whispers of the ancestors carried on the wind. Animals seemed to sense his special nature. Birds would perch on his shoulders without fear, and wild antelope would graze peacefully in his presence, untroubled by the proximity of a human. Even the most skittish of creatures felt a sense of calm around Chaminuka, as if they too recognized the sacredness of his being. His parents, though concerned by his solitary nature, came to understand that their son was destined for greatness. They marveled at his ability to solve problems that baffled even the wisest of the village elders, and they took pride in his quiet strength. One day, when Chaminuka was 7 years old, a severe drought struck the land. The rivers, once teeming with life, dried up, and the crops withered under the relentless sun. The people of Dombudzvuku were desperate, for without water, there would be no harvest, and without a harvest, there would be no food. The village elders, who had always prided themselves on their ability to predict the weather, were at a loss. They gathered in council, their faces lined with worry, but no solution presented itself. As the situation grew dire, young Chaminuka, who had been quietly observing the proceedings from the shadows, stepped forward. His voice, though soft, carried a weight of authority that belied his years. "We must honor the ancestors," he said. "They are the keepers of the rains, and if we show them our respect, they will show us their mercy." The elders, though surprised by the child's boldness, recognized the wisdom in his words. After all, Chaminuka had already proven himself to be more than just a child. The villagers came together to perform a grand ceremony in honor of the ancestors. They sang and danced, their voices rising to the heavens in a plea for salvation. Chaminuka stood at the center of it all, his eyes closed as he chanted in a language that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. As his voice rose in prayer, the sky, which had been clear and unforgiving, began to darken. Heavy clouds gathered overhead, and soon the first drops of rain fell, slowly at first, then in a torrent that drenched the parched land. The people rejoiced, their hearts filled with gratitude for the boy who had saved them. From that day on, Chaminuka was revered as a prophet, a messenger of the ancestors whose wisdom and connection to the spiritual world would guide them through the challenges that lay ahead. As Chaminuka entered adolescence, his powers grew stronger, and his connection to the spiritual world deepened. He began to experience vivid dreams and visions, glimpses of events yet to come. These visions were not always easy to interpret, but with the guidance of Mbuya Nahanda, Chaminuka learned to read the signs and understand the messages being sent by the ancestors. Mbuya Nahanda took Chaminuka under her wing, teaching him the ancient ways of the spirit world. She showed him how to commune with the ancestors, how to channel their energy, and how to use his powers to protect and guide his people. Under her tutelage, Chaminuka's understanding of the spiritual realm expanded, and he came to see the world not just as a physical place, but as a living, breathing entity where the spirits of the past, present, and future intertwined. One of Chaminuka's most famous prophecies came during a time of peace and prosperity. The Shona people were thriving, their crops abundant, and their herds healthy. But one night, Chaminuka had a dream that shook him to his core. In the dream, he saw dark clouds gathering on the horizon, not of rain but of something far more ominous. He saw flames licking at the edges of the village, heard the clash of weapons, and the cries of his people. He saw foreign warriors with cruel eyes and sharp spears marching toward his home, leaving destruction in their wake. Chaminuka awoke with a start, his heart pounding. He knew that this was no ordinary dream. It was a warning from the ancestors, a vision of danger that threatened to shatter the peace his people had enjoyed for so long. Without hesitation, Chaminuka called for a council of elders. He shared his vision with them, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "We must prepare," he said. "The time of peace is ending, and a great danger is approaching. We must strengthen our defenses and forge alliances with our neighbors, for only together can we stand against what is coming." The elders, who had grown comfortable in their prosperity, were divided. Some believed in Chaminuka's vision and were eager to take action, while others were skeptical, questioning the need to disrupt their lives for a threat that had not yet materialized. After much debate, it was decided that the village would heed Chaminuka's warning. The people worked tirelessly to fortify their defenses, building walls and stockpiling food and weapons. They sent messengers to neighboring villages, forging alliances and preparing for the worst. When the invaders finally arrived, they were met with a united front. The Shona people, inspired by Chaminuka's leadership, fought with courage and determination. The battle was fierce and many lives were lost, but in the end, the invaders were driven back, their plans of conquest thwarted. The village, though scarred by the conflict, stood strong. The people celebrated their victory, grateful for Chaminuka's foresight and guidance. Even those who had doubted him initially were forced to admit that his wisdom had saved them from certain destruction. But Chaminuka's greatness was not solely defined by his role in battle or his ability to predict danger. He was also known for his compassion, his sense of humor, and his deep understanding of human nature. One of the most beloved stories about Chaminuka involved a young man named Tafadzwa, who was hopelessly in love with a beautiful but aloof maiden named Nyasha. Nyasha was known throughout the village for her grace and beauty, but she was also fiercely independent, more interested in tending to her cattle than in entertaining suitors. Tafadzwa, shy and awkward, could barely muster the courage to speak to her, let alone declare his feelings. Desperate for help, he sought out Chaminuka, hoping that the great prophet could offer some magical solution to his romantic woes. Chaminuka listened patiently as Tafadzwa poured out his heart, describing his love for Nyasha and his frustration at her apparent indifference. When Tafadzwa finished, Chaminuka smiled, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Love is a tricky thing," he said, "but it's not always about grand gestures or flowery words. Sometimes, it's the simple things that speak the loudest." He leaned in closer, as if sharing a great secret. "Bring her a goat," he said. Tafadzwa blinked in surprise. "A goat?" he repeated, not sure if he had heard correctly. "Yes, a goat," Chaminuka confirmed. "But not just any goat. Find the juiciest, fattest goat in the village, and offer it to her as a gift. Trust me, no one can resist a good goat." Though skeptical, Tafadzwa decided to follow Chaminuka's advice. He searched high and low until he found the perfect goat, a plump and healthy creature with a glossy coat and a curious personality. With great ceremony, he presented the goat to Nyasha, who had never received such an unusual gift. To his astonishment, Nyasha's stern expression softened, and she accepted the goat with a smile. "Thank you, Tafadzwa," she said, her voice warm and genuine. "This is a wonderful gift." From that day on, Tafadzwa and Nyasha became inseparable, and the story of how a simple goat brought them together became one of the most cherished tales in the village. When asked about his unusual advice, Chaminuka would merely shrug and say, "Sometimes it's not about the gift itself, but the thought behind it. And sometimes it's just about finding the right goat." As Chaminuka's fame spread, people from far and wide came to seek his counsel. They brought gifts and offerings, hoping to receive his blessings or gain insight into their futures. Chaminuka, ever humble, welcomed them all, though he often reminded them that wisdom was not something that could be bought. He continued to serve his people with kindness and generosity, always ready to share a story, offer advice, or lighten the mood with a well-timed joke. As the years passed, Chaminuka's reputation grew to legendary proportions. He was no longer just a village prophet. He was a figure of national importance, a symbol of the spiritual connection between the Shona people and their ancestors. But with fame came challenges, and Chaminuka knew that his journey was far from over. One night, as he lay in his hut, he had a dream that would change everything. In the dream, Chaminuka saw himself standing in a vast open field, surrounded by foreign warriors. Their faces were hard and unforgiving, their eyes filled with anger and fear. Chaminuka, however, felt no fear. He stood tall, his heart filled with a sense of peace and acceptance. As the warriors raised their spears, Chaminuka smiled, knowing that this was his destiny. He understood that his time on earth was coming to an end, but he also knew that his spirit would live on, guiding his people from the ancestral realm. When Chaminuka awoke, he knew that the time had come to fulfill his final prophecy. He gathered the elders and his closest followers, sharing with them the vision of his impending death. The news was met with shock and sorrow, for they could not imagine a world without Chaminuka's guidance. But Chaminuka reassured them, explaining that his death was not the end but a new beginning. "I will always be with you," he said. "My spirit will watch over you, and my wisdom will continue to guide you, even after I am gone." True to his vision, the foreign warriors arrived in the days that followed, seeking to capture and kill Chaminuka. They had heard of his power and feared the influence he wielded over his people. When they confronted him, Chaminuka did not resist. He stood tall and proud, facing his fate with the same calm and confidence he had shown throughout his life. As the warriors raised their spears, a great wind swept across the land, and the sky darkened as if the very heavens mourned the passing of this great man. Chaminuka fell, his body returning to the earth, but his spirit ascended to the ancestral realm, where he was welcomed with open arms by those who had gone before him. Though his physical form was gone, Chaminuka's presence remained a constant force in the lives of the Shona people. His wisdom, his humor, and his boundless love for his people continued to inspire and guide them, ensuring that his legacy would live on for generations to come. And so, the story of Chaminuka, the prophet who spoke with the spirits and made even the animals pause in reverence, became a tale told around campfires, under the stars, and within the hearts of all who called Zimbabwe their home. Whenever a child was born with a glint of mischief in their eyes or a knack for avoiding chores, the elders would smile and say, "There goes another Chaminuka," knowing that his spirit lived on in every act of kindness, every burst of laughter, and every roast goat shared among friends. And so, the legacy of Chaminuka, the boy who was born under a mysterious sky and grew into a man of unparalleled wisdom, would continue to shape the lives of the Shona people, reminding them of the power of the ancestors, the importance of unity, and the enduring strength of the human spirit.